I was honored that I was asked to be one of the people unfolding panels. And when Gert asked me, she specifically said, and not only would I like you to be there, I'd like to make sure that you wear leather as a representative of the leather community. It really felt like we were being treated equally. And like every marginalized group and subculture, you're not always treated equally. So the amount of respect the quilt gave leather people generally by how they treated us, it's off the charts good. So I was living in Los Angeles when the beginning of the AIDS crisis began. And I was a very early volunteer in HIV prevention. So I heard about the AIDS quilt, I would say late 80s, probably. And I loved the work they were doing. And then in 1992, when my partner died, the panel became more important all of a sudden because I realized I needed to do something to memorialize him in some way. And it was a mechanism by which I could kind of work out my stuff. I don't know how else to say that. And so I made some calls and found out where they had a panel making class, workshop, whatever they called it, I forget. And I walked in and the room was just all love. That's all I can describe it as. It was all love. Everybody in that room was volunteering and making panels and helping people sew and giving them ideas for their panels when they had no idea what to do. And I felt kind of at home and realized that I had done the right thing by coming there to make the panel. So I have only made the one panel for the quilt, and that was for my late partner, Kevin Lockwood. He died in 1992, October 1992, and I believe I made the panel in 93. Apart from his name in big letters, Kevin Lockwood, which is on the panel, two prominent things are he loved Christmas, and he loved Santa Clauses. We had Santa Clauses all over the damn house. So there are two needlepoint Santa Clauses on either side of the panel that I sewed to it. There is a small gay pride flag, and there is a small leather pride flag, and they intersect because they did intersect in his life. I also had two photos of Kevin silkscreened onto fabric. One of them is him in front of one of the paintings that he did because he was a great artist. And the other is him in front of three sculptures that are on the wall behind him, which are these outrageous, sort of grotesque monsters because he loved sculpting these creatures. And for me, the most important part of the panel was what I put in letters at the bottom. And it says, "If love could keep me alive, I would live forever." And he said that to me once. And yeah. And he meant it, and he was a very loving person. I loved him, and if love could have kept him alive, he would have lived forever, but it didn't. Probably the most important reason for me making the panel, I think it was for me to have more moments with Kevin. I know that sounds crazy, but during the entire process of making it and laying out the things that meant something to him and seeing his photo and remembering him and going down memory lane by myself, I was telling the volunteer, who was just the nicest man in the world, Kevin's story while I'm making this. He's asking, well, who is this person and what's... So it was just really important for me to do that and remember him. And I knew this would become part of the quilt, and that was really important. I knew that it would be seen by people, hopefully someday. but I needed to do it as much to re-experience Kevin as anything else. I don't know how else to say it. I fell apart a little bit when I finished the panel and I was leaving the panel. So I was done with it, and I realized, wait, it felt like I was leaving Kevin again. In fact, when I was at the quilt showing just recently and saw his panel, I was getting ready to leave and I couldn't leave. I stayed around 2.5 more hours than I expected to because it felt like I was leaving my partner again. And it's hard. So yeah, it was important to do it, and it was important for me to be part of the quilt, but I did it for Kevin, but I'll be frank, I did it for me. It felt like it was important to do. When I made the panel, it didn't feel like activism. It was a personal act. It was important to me, it felt important to Kevin, and in all honesty, I don't think I was seeing the big picture of activism at the time. But the quilt is the largest community art project ever. And it really is a community of people that, even though they don't know each other, they have contributed to a single project that helps people's lives live on. And people are remembered, they don't go away, they're still living if you remember them. It educates people, it inspires people, it gives people an outlet to grieve. And most of us that have had someone pass need to grieve more than once. It's an ongoing process. It's very iterative. And but at the time, no, it wasn't an activist thing. It is an act of activism, absolutely, as I see it today. But at the time, all I knew was that I needed to make the panel. I was in front of my panel, and the woman and her family were next to me, and she happened to mention that the panel that was nearly adjacent to my partner's panel was her brother. And she began to tell me the story of her brother, and I began to tell her the story of my partner. And I learned that the Girl Scout troop that the guy sponsored made the panel for him, and how beautiful that was. And I told her about Kevin's life, and this young girl was carrying flowers, and she saw me crying over my partner's panel, and she stopped and she took a flower out of her hand and she laid it on Kevin's panel. I have a photo of that. And I just thought, I know she wasn't even around during this era, and she was paying honor to my late partner. And I looked around and everybody was telling stories about the people in the panels. And sometimes people didn't know who they were, and somebody else did, and they were talking. I saw a family sitting around a panel, a grandmother, young kids, a mother and father. And I heard the mother say to the 3 or 4-year-old, "Do you know why we're here?" And she said, "Because," I forget the name, died. Do you know how he died? This was a family educating their tiny children about HIV, AIDS, and there's the next generation being educated directly by the quilt. That's magic. That's true magic. As I think back on 35 years of the quilt's existence, it's one of the few physical manifestations of the AIDS crisis that I can look at and say, I see the entire story right here. And there aren't many things that I can point to. So to me, when I see it, I see 35 years from the horrors of my friends dropping dead day after day. And I would literally not want to pick up the phone because I didn't know who was now dead. And all that's horrors to the beauty of where we are now, which is a better life for many people because of all the advances we've made. It's all in the quilt. That's what I see everything. It's like a snapshot of all of that for me in front of me in a beautiful way.